ahead of the 2025 International Day of Zero Waste. Under the theme, This is Zero Waste, what zero waste solutions look like for fashion and beyond, I, Osei Bonsu, the Operations and Programs Director for the Green Africa Youth Organization, is delighted to be your moderator. At GAYO, we believe that young people are the heart of Africa's sustainable future. Through policy, research, innovation, and green entrepreneurship, we are shaping a movement that drives real environmental impact. We are represented in 3 African countries with project location in 12 others in the Global South. We are a strong member of the Global Alliance, coordinating zero waste projects in African cities. Now talking about the Global Alliance of Incinerator Alternative, GAIA is a worldwide alliance of more than 1,000 grassroots groups, non-governmental organizations, and individuals all over 90 countries. It aims to catalyze a global shift towards a zero-waste world, built on respect for ecological limits, community rights, and environmental justice. By strengthening grassroots social movements, serving as the official organizer for this live LinkedIn webinar, its objective is to raise awareness on the UN International Day of Zero Waste and Real Zero Waste, rooted in environmental justice and without false solutions like incinerator or incinerations. We would like to make this 45-minute event as informative and interactive as possible. Please do well to say hi in the comment section and let us know where you are joining us from, including what zero waste initiatives inspire you. Now, let's begin from what is zero waste. Zero waste isn't just about managing waste better. It's about preventing waste at the source through redesign, reuse, and repair. It's also a system change approach that benefits both people and the planet, according to the Zero Waste Alliance. Worldwide, its importance has been documented, from cutting emissions and pollutions to creating green jobs and strengthening local economies, and lastly, protecting frontline communities from zero waste or waste colonialism and many other importance. While it's only the 3rd year we are officially celebrating the Zero Waste Day, the Global Alliance Incinerator Alternative, including its members and the Zero Waste Network, have been doing incredible work on zero waste for decades. Please, wherever you are, you can just put in the chat session congratulating the GAIA network for the incredible work they've been doing all over these years. Today, recognizing the team from the UN for the Zero Waste Day towards zero waste in fashion and textile, it's very important that we state this. Fast fashion has led to a global textile waste crisis, with landfill overflowing and waste shipped to the global south, deepening environmental and social injustice. Just look at our communities. And that is why the work of the GAIA members is very important. And worldwide, they've been proving that zero waste solutions exist, from textile reuse and repair to policy advocacy, holding brands accountable. Today, we will be having 3 incredible speakers share real-world solutions to tackling textile waste at every level. To begin with, our first panel member is Minori Lee. She is the technical context and digital transformation lead for the United Nations Environmental Program, Tackling Textile Initiative. And this provides strategic leadership and encourages sector-wide collaboration to accelerate a just transition towards a sustainable and circular textile value chain. The second panelist that will be joining us is Bastián Barria. We are also having her as a member of the Global Alliance. She's the co-founder of the NGO Reverdesierto, an organization that seeks to impact and raise awareness about the use and disposal of textiles in the Tarapacá region and throughout the country. And the last person, and not the least on the panel, is Dorothy Otieno, CEJAD Kenya. She is the programs officer at the Center for Environmental Justice and Development Kenya, where she leads the Plastics and Waste Management Program. She is an environmental scientist specializing in environmental law with experience in tackling environmental pollution and addressing waste management challenges. Please help me give a warm welcome to our Zero Waste experts, and we're excited, our panelists, to hear from you. Now, let's begin with Minori Lee. We would like to hear from you. How do you, or should I say, how do zero waste systems in fashion and textile support communities and economic growth? And what is needed to really scale these particular systems?
Thank you so much, Betty, and thank you to GAIA for having me today. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Betty, that's a really good question, because zero waste systems are so important for textiles, because I think what we've seen is a lot of the focus of organizations and indeed companies is on really downstream efficiency, because it's low-hanging fruit, it's an easy way to save money. But what we really need is more of a focus on upstream solutions, so that we can design out waste from being created at all. So zero waste systems are also really important because by nature, they support economic growth. So they support SMEs in saving money, they support countries to conserve their natural resources, and they support communities by basically creating a culture of innovation and resilience to shocks. And I think, from everything from COVID to the various economic instabilities and economic challenges, we've been seeing a lot of different shocks, and that's incredibly important. Perhaps just to give an idea of the textile sector's impacts and the current linear textile sector that we have, it's a really significant contributor to what we at UNEP refer to as the interconnected environmental crises of climate change, biodiversity and nature loss and pollution. So each year, the textile sector is responsible for approximately between 2 to 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It uses the equivalent of 86 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of water, and it contributes 9% of microfiber pollution to our oceans. And those are the impacts of just producing. So when we think about the products when they're actually used, it's even more significant. So each year we see 92 million tons of textile waste being generated worldwide. So that's the equivalent of a garbage truck full of clothing being incinerated or dumped in landfills every second. And basically this is because we're buying more and using it less. For example, between 2000 and 2015, the number of times that a piece of clothing was used before it was discarded decreased by an estimated 36%, while at the same time clothing production doubled. So in order to scale zero waste systems and counter these impacts, basically all signs point to the need for a circular textile industry. And, coming from UNEP, at the global level, everyone needs to walk the same path to scale up circularity by working on solutions that contribute to 3 priorities that UNEP has outlined in our roadmap for a circular textile sector. There's a lot of fine print and a lot of examples, but basically the first priority is a shift away from overconsumption and overproduction towards circular business models and circular products. The second is an improvement of practices when it comes to production processes, product design and care, as well as a just transition, particularly for workers and particularly for women and other vulnerable workers. And the third priority is we really need a significant investment in infrastructure, so such as for textile recycling, as well as for renewable energy. Thanks, Betty. Back over to you.
Thank you so much, Minori, for sharing. I really loved your take. I feel like it's really true. We are really buying more and using less. And just to hear that 90 million tons of textile waste is being discarded annually is just mind-blowing. I'm sure our live viewers are also amazed at these statistics. And also hearing about the current linear textile system, I think this is really a call and a push for a more secular one. And we all know this is instigating the triple planetary crisis. And there is a need to really shift towards and have more sustainable communities for not only ourselves, but our future generations to come. So now this takes me to another panel member that is with us today. She's Bastian. She's also a GAIA member. And she has been doing a lot of incredible work when it comes to mapping the impact of textile waste in her community. So today we'd like to hear from you, Bastian. How does textile waste impact your community?
Hello, everyone. I will speak in Spanish.
Okay.
Muchas gracias a Gaia por la invitación. Gracias, Betty, por tu presentación.
Thank you, Gaia, for this invitation. Thank you, Betty, for your welcome words. And I'd like to very briefly comment on the impact of this textile waste crisis in our region, and that is Latin America, and particularly its impact on the north of Chile, the Atacama Desert, and the Alto Hospicio commune in the north of our country. Chile is a main importer of second-hand clothes in Latin America in our region, and it's the main consumer or user of clothes overall. Based on what I've said, according to UN studies, in the year 2022, we imported close to 140,000 tons of used textiles from different parts of the world. 70% from North America, particularly the USA, and the rest mostly from European countries and Asia. These clothes come here, they come in through the Iquique port that is very near Alto Hospicio, and these clothes and then discarded, close to 70% of them in the desert and very close to the Alto Hospicio city, which is affecting the communities living in the area. We must highlight that Alto Hospicio is an area with very few resources, with high social vulnerability, and there are high criminality indices. So it's not only a crisis related to waste, it's also a crisis that affects social security. It's a public health issue too, and it's affecting the quality of life and dignity of individuals. Incineration based on this waste to eliminate the evidence by these people discarding is affecting biodiversity, because there are birds living in the area, in the desert, and the communities that breathe the air from incinerators. It's not only the incinerators, but also the dumping of these wastes release microplastics. Over 70% of the clothes imported by the country have plastic fiber. So this is a serious situation that's been in place for over 2 decades, and we've mapped, we've identified those areas that are being more affected by this problem. And together with our foundation, we've been promoting actions within the field of circular economy and based on zero waste.
Thank you so much for sharing those interesting insights, Bastian. It's just overwhelming to hear the intercontinental waste trade that happens with textile, and also to hear the interconnected crisis you mentioned, from social security to public health to quality of life and even dignity to waste speakers or even frontline communities. Thank you so much for sharing this, and that is why the importance of GAIA and its network really should continue the work that you're doing. Like, they should really continue the work they're doing, because this fight for waste colonialism should not end at a community level. It should go beyond to international and the global level. And this is why we have in our presence today Dorothy, who will be sharing with us her fight with waste colonialism. We want to hear from you, Dorothy. How can zero waste fight waste colonialism and transform communities and industries, both specific to textile waste and in general? Dorothy, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. Today, I'm talking about textile waste in Kenya, and I believe that right now, how does textile affect communities I can talk about the perspective of those people who import clothes for sale, the communities that depend on secondhand clothing so that they can make a living. And what we are receiving, especially also from authorities, is that the secondhand clothing are coming in, but a majority of it, maybe approximately 60 to 70%, cannot be worn or cannot be sold. And in that regard, they are sold or they are thrown as waste. And so those communities only sell maybe 40% of the waste that they receive, of the textile that they receive. On the other hand, as we speak to waste speakers, because we are fortunate enough to work with them, they receive this type of waste. They tell us that those are not the types of waste that move from the dump sites because they are mixed. It's now challenging to get clothes that are made from cotton only because they're mixed polyester and cotton and many other mixtures. And those kind of mixtures prevent the ability of the companies and the ability of the waste pickers to collect for recycling. And in that case, they end up in the dump sites, and they also are part of the waste that are continuing to burn in the dump sites. And because we know that some of the clothes and textiles are made using chemicals, and these chemicals are affecting neighboring communities when they burn up together with other types of waste. The impacts to communities, of course, is wastage and losses, because then people are losing money trying to bring into the country clothes that they can sell, and then they're not able to sell that. And so there's a lot of money that's being wasted by this community that's dependent on that. There is increased cost for managing this type of waste, because then it has to go back to our governments to find a way of managing the textile waste, which is coming into the country and were not even made here. And so in that case, the cost for managing textile waste is increasing for county governments. And then, of course, the exposure to toxic chemicals. And lastly, the filling up of dump sites. We are already struggling with dump sites that are full in Kenya right now. And so continuing coming in of those textile waste does not help, because then it continues to fill up our dump sites. And therefore, I can say that communities that are living around the dump site, close to the dump sites, are facing challenges because of the ever expansion of dump sites, which is moving into the communities. So these are some of the things that I can point out from the beginning as impacts to communities.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. I just want to mention that to our viewers, if you have questions, you can please put them in the chat box and we would respond to them. Our speakers will respond to them. Whilst we are waiting for those, I just want to start from you, Dorothy. I want to hear from you. You spoke about the influx of waste into your communities and how management and how ministries and assembly officials are also dealing with those waste in terms of managing them better. I would like to hear from you. What's your point of view when we talk about zero waste and how solution looks like for fast fashion or the fashion industry, from your point of view, whilst you are receiving the questions?
Yes, I believe that if we're looking at zero waste as an entire system, then it's we can look at it as a whole, and textile falling in there, because zero waste systems is technically a system where we can, first of all, before any product is made, it has been thought about, and there has been, the thinking has informed sustainability, so that when that item comes to the end of its useful life, it's not going to affect the environment. Also, zero waste considered items like redesigning. How can we redesign products to make sure that they don't end up in the environment as waste, including textile, among other types of waste? It's also about recovery. Can we think of products that can be recovered, can be reused, can be recycled, so as to close the gaps of waste management, or for example, waste issues, that products that are coming into the market are those that can be reused, recovered, and do not end up as waste. And finally, the whole concept of zero waste systems is to avoid burning, because when we burn materials, we are misusing, so to speak, resources, and it's sort of like a loss, and that does not contribute to conservation of resources. And therefore, as I look at zero waste systems and what we have been able to do at the community level, we have been able to understand and characterize waste. So for example, we know what type of waste is coming out of communities and households, what are their origin, what are their quantities. And the origin is important, because even though we know that some of the companies are originating from Kenya, we can point that some other waste that are ending up here are from companies from abroad. And such kind of information also allows us to question. We're constantly questioning, why is it that these materials are coming from outside? What do we do about that? If, for example, in Kenya right now, we have the extended producer responsibility regulations. For those companies from abroad, of course, now any producer, regardless of whether you're Kenyan based or you're importing, you are supposed to show how you're going to extend your responsibility in the country if you bring in a substance or a cloth or a product or a material. But it allows us to think about situations like, okay, fine, if textiles, for example, are coming into the country and they're mixed, and we cannot recycle that, why is it that we have to depend exclusively on items that are coming in, either as secondhand or whatever, while we have a cotton industry, for example, that's dying down, that we could revive, that could make only cotton clothes that can be easily reused? How can we revive the clothing industry in our country? And so these are some of the questions that zero waste allows us to ask, because we question the origin of this. And finally, I have a good example. During the COVID period, Kenya went into manufacturing its own masks and all of that. And it was said that whatever we manufactured were of better quality. So we want to go back to that system where we can depend on ourselves and prevent colonialism from starting to begin with.
Wow, thank you, Dorothy, for sharing. I really love the phrase thinking informed by sustainability, and that is what zero waste informed by fashion or informing fashion should look like. And now I just want to direct a different question to Bastián, whilst I return back on the same question on how zero waste can look like when it comes to fashion. To Bastián, I would like to ask you, how is colonialism related to waste with mismanagement? One of our viewers is asking you this question.
Bien, se asocia principalmente porque a partir del hecho de que las prendas vienen importadas de otras partes del mundo.
It's mainly associated because if we move from the fact that these clothes are important from other countries around the world, this mismanagement has to do with the north, and that is where this clothing is coming from. I mentioned this before, and this has to do with overconsumption and overproduction, and how the industry has supported and fostered the idea of
Comercializando sin parar y manteniendo 24 temporadas al año de distintos tipos de prenda, lo cual es
trading non-stop and maintaining 24 seasons a year of different types of clothing, which is, I believe, quite serious, quite alarming. And the power of social media, of course, and how the industry is fostering more and more consumption, this has triggered and boosted this waste colonialism. I think that this extended responsibility production law is today applying in Europe, in the global north, could actually become to the detriment of the global south, as long as these countries are willing to receive these clothes. Today, at least in Latin America, we don't have technical capacities or financial capacities to receive these clothes that come from these countries. That is to say, in order to provide solutions to this fashion colonialism, countries that are important, I should say countries that are exporting clothes, should look for internal means to be responsible and liable for their clothes. And on the other hand, these countries that are willing and able to receive these clothes should specialize and search for good economic and technical capacities to be able to do so. And there's traceability, there's control. Today in Chile, we receive other types of material, not just clothes, but in these containers, we receive other type of materials. And I can tell you that colonialism is related to mismanagement of waste, mainly from those countries that are currently eliminating or trying to get rid of this material like clothes. But we have to be careful, because those countries that are receiving these clothes should be better prepared and look for alternatives so that we can transform this into sustainable opportunities like other countries are doing, where we foster local trade, green employment, and providing dignity and justice to those communities that have been affected by this for a very long time.
Much, Bastian, for sharing that. I think it reflects to what Dorothy mentioned at the beginning, talking about extended producer responsibility. And now you mentioning it's the responsibility of the receiving country to capacitate their staff and ensure that the right clothing are coming in, and also the responsibility of the sender to ensure that whatever is being sent are the proper attire or the proper clothes. Thanks so much for sharing that. We have another question in the chat, and I'm going to direct it to Minori. It says, what do you think every actor including government, business, civil society, responsibilities are? In concrete, because we are always blaming each other for this problem. Do you want me to reiterate the question again? What do you think every actor's responsibilities are when it comes to the zeroist issue? Because we are always blaming ourselves or pointing the fingers to other people for the problem.
Thank you, Betty. And indeed, that's a really recurring problem, that it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, because businesses won't move unless policymakers move, and consumers, a lot of the times the responsibility falls on consumers, who have very limited, although, obviously they still have a lot of things that they can do, they're still quite limited in their influence further up the value chain. I think the 5-second answer would be everyone needs to follow the 3 priorities that I outlined before. But yeah, I think of those stakeholders, I think particularly policymakers and businesses are the really crucial puzzle pieces for this. For policymakers, there's 2 levels that they can act on. On the national level, they need to have strong regulations that discourage waste and pollution, like tax increases on harmful materials that prevent circularity and therefore cause waste. And then on the other hand, on the national level, they need to really strongly incentivize and reward circularity. So like my fellow panelists were saying, really making sure that countries don't, for example, countries that import used textiles, that they have the right sort of textile products that are appropriate and are of good quality, and that they have the infrastructure to do so. Governments also need to set circularity criteria for public procurement as a way of rewarding circularity and really setting just long-term visions and strategies on circularity to give businesses long-term security to basically increase their ambitions. I think perhaps also what's important to note is on an international level, policymakers really need to coordinate and work to promote and harmonize standards and certification schemes. And perhaps the most important piece, because as we've seen with the used textile trade, that the policies in one country can certainly have very devastating impacts in others, particularly in the global south. So countries need to work together to identify and mitigate potential impacts along the entire value chain of any potential policies that they might be planning. For example, if one country decides to, implement a ban on synthetic fibers, for example, this may have impacts on land use, water availability, etc., in cotton-producing countries. So this coordination piece is really important because the circular textile sector of tomorrow cannot replicate the impacts, the inequalities, and perhaps most importantly, the power imbalances of today's linear textile sector. For civil society, circularity will basically require a level of coordination and a level of information sharing that we have never seen before. There is an incredibly important role for civil society in collecting information on, perhaps these potential impacts of circularity and sharing it up and down the value chain, because without it, circularity just will not work. And then for businesses, and I think particularly brands and retailers, they have enormous power. And if you're a brand or a retailer, they need to set KPIs on circularity, particularly on product design and circular business models, and reframe their marketing. Basically, that is one of the most important things that they can do to encourage consumers to try circular business models and products and to make circularity aspirational. If I could just say a little note about fast fashion, because I know that it's very easy to say, oh, fast fashion is the reason that we're in this situation. At UNEP, we think that fast fashion is the symptom, and overconsumption encouraged by marketing is the illness that we need to address. Because I think people will and should always have access to safe, sustainable, and affordable clothing. So fast fashion is just a symptom that I think is a bit of a shorthand for overconsumption. And so brands certainly have a piece in sort of pushing that overconsumption message. For other businesses, if you're a producer, it's really important to share information up and down your supply chain to collaborate on solutions. And I think recyclers and innovators, they are really, really crucial for a world where, most of our clothes don't end up incinerated or disposed to landfill. And so what's really important for recyclers is to make sure that, their solutions address existing market barriers like lack of information, lack of consumer engagement, because, in order to address those barriers, that's how we increase uptake. So that was not at all the 5 seconds that I promised in the beginning.
Right. I think that was really interesting, Minori. Thanks for sharing. I love the symptom and the illness. Audience, if you didn't hear that, you have to go and rewatch the video to hear what she said regarding the symptom and the illness of fast fashion. I think some takeaways from my end would be talking about the strong regulations from the government, the incentives and the rewards on circularity is very important, that there should be a lot of uptake. I think here in Ghana, where I also work, in other African countries like Uganda and Botswana, as part of our zero waste work, it's something we're also trying to chip in, working with the government to ensure that businesses are incentivized and they are rewarded when it comes to the work they do on circularity. You also spoke about increasing ambition. It's true. There's upcoming intergovernmental negotiation committee coming up, and we are still hearing this conversation over and over again on waste. We need countries to strengthen the ambition when it comes to waste. And then lastly, you spoke about policies also needed to be strengthened, and ensuring that stakeholders come together to work together in all value chain. Yes, it's very important, and I think we should all pay attention to that. I just got notified that the last feedback given by Bastian in Spanish was not heard by our audience in English. So if I could please call on the interpreter to give us a little overview of the response from Bastian before we proceed with the rest of the questions. Okay, thank you so much for informing us of that. Please, to all the LinkedIn Live viewers, please do well to choose the options from Spanish to English. I think you'll be able to hear the interpretation. However, I'm going to ask Bastian the next question now, and hopefully after he is done talking, I would plead with the interpreters to come directly on this channel to interpret live, because on LinkedIn, it's possible they do not have the options to switch between English and Spanish. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I think the technical team can handle that at the back, and I would also do well from my end to interpret what Bastian has said by ensuring I record directly, I listen directly to what he says and say it after. I think there's a last question from the team, and I would want Bastian to reiterate on this question again. I think I asked it to Dorothy, and the question was, I'll just take that question again. What zero waste solutions look like for fast fashion and beyond, or fashion and beyond? So I would love for Bastian to respond to this question. Bastian, over to you. I will repeat the question again. What does zero waste solution look like for fashion and beyond?
Ok, bien, yo creo que voy a hablar de otro aspecto
I'm going to
adicional a lo técnico y
speak
a lo
about an
relacionado a lo material.
aspect other than the
Creo
technical
que
and
más
material
allá de la
ones,
agenda que tiene que ver
beyond
con
the
responsabilidad
agenda that has to
extendida
do with
del
extended
productor
producer
de ropa
responsibility
a
and
generar
the
soluciones dentro de
clothes
la circularidad
importer to
a través de
generate
la educación
solutions
ambiental, a
within
través de la
circularity
capacitación,
through
a través
environmental
de la
education,
reutilización, el
training,
reciclaje y
reuse,
reuso de prendas,
recycling
según la
of
jerarquía que invite,
clothes
¿cierto?, a
according to the
utilizar menos material y
hierarchy,
menos energía para
inviting
hacerlo
to
mucho más
use
sostenible.
less
Creo que
material and
también hay
less
que
energy to
cuestionarnos el
make
por qué
this more
consumimos,
sustainable. We must ask
porque en
why
eso
we
radica de alguna
consume
manera
so much,
el origen
because that is
del
the
ranking,
origin
¿cierto?, de las
of
consecuencias que tiene este sobreconsumo
the
y
consequences
sobreproducción.
of this overconsumption and
¿Qué me hace
overproduction.
consumir a mí
What
como
takes
individuo y
me
qué
to
necesidades
or leads me
necesito
to
cubrir yo
consume as an
internamente para
individual, and what needs
que de
do
alguna
I
manera ese consumo sea
have to
excesivo?
meet
Es una de las cosas
internally
que también
that
nosotros
lead me to
planteamos
excessive
y hacemos que las
consumption.
personas reflexionen
We
dentro
ask people to reflect
de su comportamiento,
on their behavior.
porque una solución que a lo mejor
A
no está basada en lo
solution that
técnico,
maybe is not
pero creo
based on
que
a
interpelar
technical
de alguna
aspect, but
manera
I
hacer que
think
las personas
we
reflexionen en
must make
torno
people think
a
about
esto,
this,
apelando también a su salud mental,
calling upon their
apelando
mental
también
health,
al consumo
calling
que tienen
upon
asociado a eso.
their
Me parece que
consumption
también es
linked
algo
to
que
that
deberíamos
mental
impulsar desde la
health.
sociedad
That's
civil,
something we must promote at civil society level.
no solamente quedarnos con lo técnico,
Not
¿cierto?
only
Que es algo que es una tarea
think about
enorme.
the
Yo creo
technical
que
aspects, which entail
de alguna
a lot
manera
of work
impulsar la
indeed,
agenda de
but we
basura
must
cero
promote the zero waste
desde el punto de
agenda
vista y desde la perspectiva y el enfoque
from
de justicia ambiental.
the
Creo que es
environmental
algo
justice
fundamental
approach and
aquí en
focus. This
Chile,
is
aquí en
something
Latinoamérica, nos
essential in
falta
Chile and in
mucho
Latin
camino por
America. We have
recorrer.
a
Es
long
importante
way to
justamente
go. There's quite a
tratar de
challenge
liderar
to
esto
try
desde la
and
ONG,
lead
¿cierto? Decía desde la
this
Fundación Reverdesierto.
at
Y
our
creemos que
NGO.
hay una oportunidad
There's an opportunity ahead of
no solamente
us,
laboral,
not
sino que
only
simbólica para el
regarding
mundo y de cómo nos
employment or
contribuimos al
jobs,
desierto a través de cero,
and
a
also to
través de
stop
estas técnicas, a
polluting
través
our
de la
deserts,
ancestralidad, porque de alguna
and
manera
through ancestral knowledge too. It's not something that we are inventing now, but the reuse of products and materials has been carried out for years and years by humankind. And now we are talking about this at a more technical, academic, industrial level, but these practices of reuse have been used to save money, save material, making these products to be more durable over time. And we've got to bring in this knowledge lost along the way and linking them to technology and development. I believe that the solutions we need within the region are mainly based on the extended producer responsibility and importer responsibility laws to know what we are importing, and based on that generate education and industry from an environmental justice standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bastian, for sharing. I find that very insightful. Just to our audience, Bastian asked a very critical question, and that is, why do you consume so much? I think it's a question that we all have to reflect on. He also paid emphasis on calling upon our mental health, because that is the initiation of we buying and even consuming or even using. Away from the technical or material wants, and also extended producer responsibility as solutions, away from the environmental education as a solution, away from inviting use, all the PRs, reuse, reduce, away from using less energy in terms of production, etc. He is laying emphasis on, do we not see the consequences of our works or our consumption? Do we not see the consequences within our communities, our environment? Why do we choose to consume more? And it's important that we look at our mental health, and it's very important that the GAIA members also factor this within their campaigns, looking at the citizens' mental health to ensure that we recognize the consequences that waste pollution is having in our community and going towards a zero waste agenda. Thank you so much, Bastian, for sharing. Now we have a last question before we bring this live webinar to an end. And I'm going to pass this question to Minori. Minori, I would like to hear from you. Are there initiatives at the national level that addresses the import of used textiles? Are there some you've heard of? Before, I think I'm going to make Bastian and Dorothy respond to this as well. So Minori, have you heard of any initiative at the national level that addresses directly the imports on use of textiles? Just quickly to this question. Okay, allow me, Bastian, can you respond to this whilst Minori joins us? And Dorothy, please get ready to respond to this question.
Very briefly, from the trade union economy of the circular textile in my country and emerging from the foundation, Reverdesierto, we've been recovering certain used clothes and reassessing them, giving them a new value. We're also working with e-commerce platforms so that we can move these clothes with local value to a different location where we can take them, but not just take them physically, but in a more symbolic way. People can narrate the story, can give testimony to what they're going through so that they can reflect both on a physical and material front, and they can pass on this message to their communities. We need to understand that these are clothes that are rescued from the Atacama Desert. So these are emerging initiatives. It's a large challenge, significant, I have to say, but they're based on the import of these clothes.
Thank you so much for sharing briefly, Bastian. And to our audience, Bastian is recognizing the need for we ourselves to be the frontiers, telling the story about the impact that waste has in our communities and ensuring that we as ourselves also develop individual solutions towards the waste problem. Now, point it over to Minori to respond to this, giving her final words also as we are coming to an end.
Hi, Betty. I'm so sorry. I did have to reconnect, so I think I might have missed a little bit. Do you mind repeating? Oh, sorry. I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. I was saying that the question is, are there any initiatives at the national level that you know of that addresses the import and use of textiles?
So I think from the UNEP Textile Initiative perspective, we really work mostly with governments. But having said that, we do have a project in Ghana, Tunisia, and Pakistan on the import of used textiles, working to basically look at the upstream solutions that my fellow panelists were talking about that were needed. So basically coming up with criteria to determine when a used textile is considered valuable as a used textile or when it can be considered waste, concerning where exactly it will end up. And so our hope is that through this project, it will stop textile waste from being exported at the source. So textile waste never gets to countries that do not have the infrastructure to deal with it and also don't need it. So I'm happy to share more information in the chat on that. But yes, at the moment, I think that would be the main one to highlight for us.
Okay, thank you so much, Minori, and I understand you have to leave. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now go to Dorothy for the last response on this question before we call it a day.
Thank you, Betty. I think for our perspective, I will talk about policies because at the national level, we have the Bureau of Standards, which has developed standards for textiles. And one of the things that we are coming to realize quickly is even with those standards, sometimes how can we strengthen monitoring? Because a package could come into the country and then, you know, it looks, when you open the container, then it looks like it's useful textile, but then at the back, then there are those textiles that are not going to be used. And so those are some of the questions that now together we are, you know, looking at answering those questions. Alternatively, there's a question, for example, of the chemicals that are used to treat those textiles. Because of the exposure that they bring to the consumers, the person who's going to buy that, we're also looking at that. So I can say that at the policy level, yes, Kenya is really proactive with those standards. And what we are doing now together is that are becoming relevant.
Okay, thank you very much, Dorothy, for sharing. Dear audience, you've heard our speakers today. They've shared real-life examples on how they are interacting with and working around zero waste within their cities, also tackling the issue of textile waste in their communities. I'd like to use the opportunity to thank all the speakers because they are joining us from all over the world. We are grateful for the insights you've shared with us today. To our audience, you just heard from our speakers and you joined the Global Alliance Incinerator Alternative LinkedIn Live on the topic, This is Zero Waste, what zero waste solutions look like for fast fashion and beyond. And I was your moderator, Osei Bonsu from the Green Africa Youth Organization. We'll be following up with a recording and links to answers to the questions raised, as well as you'll be seeing a lot of videos, a lot of more information in the chat session since this will be recorded and shared. But before you leave, please do well to follow us on LinkedIn to continue the conversation and use the hashtag #ThisIsZeroWaste and Zero Waste Day to celebrate the International Day of Zero Waste. Please don't forget to also visit our website, GAIA, noburn.org/going0waste. You'll see that link also dropped in the chat that you can access that link there. For more information, please do well to get involved with us, connect with us, ask us any question, and I'm also available on LinkedIn. It was lovely being your host for today. I enjoyed the conversation and I hope you also did at your end. Thank you and have a fruitful day.